Welcome to the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Rosensweet, mom of 3 young people, peaceful parenting coach, and your cheerleader and guide on all things parenting. Each week, we'll cover the tools, strategies, and support you need to end the yelling and power struggles and encourage your kids to listen and cooperate so that you can enjoy your family time. I'm happy to say we have a great relationship with our 3 kids. The teen years have been easy and joyful, not because we're special unicorns, but because my kids were raised with peaceful parenting. I've also helped so many parents just like you stop struggling and enjoy their kids again. I'm excited to be here with you today and bring you the insight and information you need to make your parenting journey a little more peaceful. Let's dive into this week's conversation. Hey all, welcome back to another episode of the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. Today is an exciting day and a very special episode because it is our 1-year anniversary of the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. We started this podcast in June 2021 and it is now June 2022. And I am so excited to be bringing you this after a year, and we've learned so much and we've had so much fun and we've had so many great guests and coaching, and I hope you all have enjoyed listening as much as I have enjoyed making this podcast. So in honor of our 1-year anniversary, my podcast manager, Simona, and my teammate, Corey, and I decided that it would be fun to have a mashup of our guest experts' advice. You know that at the end of every episode, I ask our guest expert, what advice would you give to your younger parent self? We've compiled some of our favorite answers, and I just want you to bathe in this excellent wisdom and advice from all of these wonderful folks who've been on the podcast, and be sure to listen in till the end where I'm going to share the advice that I would give my younger parent self. Before we dive in, I just want to let you know that you don't have to take notes here if you don't want to. We have put together a beautiful sheet that has a summary of each guest expert's advice, something that you can save to your phone or print it out and hang it up if you like, as a reminder of all of these beautiful pieces of wisdom. If you would like that resource, you can go to sarahrosensweet.com/guest expert advice, where you can download it for free and keep it so you never forget what any of these pieces are, because you're on this journey and these pieces of wisdom are for you to take advantage of now, so that you don't have to get to the point where you're looking back thinking, I wish that I had known this when my kids were younger. So again, go to sarahrosensweet.com/guest expert advice for that beautiful sheet that we've put together that has sort of summary of all of the wonderful pieces of advice that you are about to hear. So let's just dive in. Our first guest expert is Dr. Laura Markham. Dr. Laura is my personal mentor. For those of you who don't know, I did a 6-month intensive coach training with Dr. Laura about 6 years ago now, I think, about 6 years ago. And she is a friend and a mentor, and I'm immensely fortunate to have learned with her and learned from her. Dr. Laura Markham is the founder of AHA Parenting, and she is also the author of Peaceful Parents, Happy Kids and Peaceful Parents, Happy Siblings. So let's listen to what Dr. Laura has to say. If you could go back in time and give advice to yourself as a young parent, what would it be?
It would be to trust myself. And I did end up trusting myself, but I think what gave me the strength to do that was my son. So he was my firstborn. And I think listening to him is what gave me the strength to trust myself, noticing what he needed and being responsive to him. I think it would have alleviated some anxiety if I didn't have to wonder if I was doing the right thing, right?
So you mean you saw the results, like you trusted yourself listening to him, and then you saw, oh, that worked out really well.
Yes. I think the advice would be pay attention to what your child needs and do that. And don't worry about the noise from society that says, oh, but then he'll be entitled, or then he'll need you forever. He'll be clingy. He'll be, in fact, none of those things turned out to be true. He's a wonderful human being. And it's because I parented responsibly. I noticed what he needed. And what every child needs is a little different, but we know what human needs in general need. And he needed me to pay attention to what he needed and to do that. And when I did, he flourished.
So just to bring it full circle, you didn't respond to fear based on what other people were telling you what you should do or what you shouldn't do. You just listened to yourself and what you thought that he needed.
Yes, that's right. And you know what? If I was wrong, he showed me I was wrong, and then I would just try something again. Yeah, something else.
I love that. Listen to yourself. Our next guest expert wisdom is from Ned Johnson, who is also a really wonderful person who I'm extremely fond of. I often think that I wish that we were actual friends in real life. He is so wonderful and so much fun to talk to. And he's actually been on the podcast twice. Ned Johnson is an author, speaker, and the founder of Prep Matters, which is an educational company that provides academic tutoring and educational planning and standardized test prep. He's also the co-author of two of my favorite parenting books, What Do You Say? And The Self-Driven Child. We'll put the link to everyone's books in the show notes. And so let's have a listen to what Ned has to say.
I didn't prioritize sleep when I was younger as much as I do now. And because I have this daughter who's, again, she's, as we describe in the book, sort of sensitive to secondhand stress, I could have done, we've all made mistakes, and I'm certainly no different than anyone else. But I know the times when things didn't go well were almost always, if it wasn't my fault, it would have gone better had my energy been different. So if for my younger self, I would have worked less than I did, or at least found a way to get a little more sleep and to exercise on a more regular basis. Because vigorous exercise blows off cortisol, and cortisol is the dominant stress hormone. And so for the times when my daughter, and she was, her brain was being wired, I would have been more effective in all the ways that I love her and want her to be helpful, and in ways that I want to help her, had I prioritized more sleep and exercise on a daily basis.
That's great advice. And I think a lot of parents don't put themselves on that to-do list. And that's what I talk about that a lot with parents, of not putting yourself last, because you do need to take care of yourself so you can show up for your kids and be the best parent that you can be.
And I now that I reflect on this, I learned TM when my daughter was transcendental meditation when she was about 10. And if I had had the wherewithal to do that earlier, that would have helped too. But we learn things when we learn things.
Thanks, Ned. That is just so wise. Since I read about transcendental meditation in The Self-Driven Child and talked to Ned about it, I've been trying to do it as well. So wish me luck on keeping regular with that. I've been managing to do it about once a week, and I'd really like to do it for about 15 minutes once a day. Now that I've said that publicly, maybe I will be better at it. Our next piece of expert guest wisdom comes from Yolanda Williams. Yolanda is behind Parenting Decolonized. Yolanda is a conscious parenting coach and social justice instructor. Her work is amazing. If you don't know it, be sure to check out Parenting Decolonized. And also in September, I'm going to be one of the guests in her social justice Parenting Decolonized conference. So be sure to look out for that. Let's listen to what Yolanda has to say.
Okay, so evidence-based research is amazing, but your lived experience is just as important. So you got to be willing to pivot when something works better for you, and if it goes against the grain. Something like screen time for me, there's unlimited screen time over here because Gia is autistic and it actually helps her. But when I first was pregnant, I read all these books and they were like, no screen time, nothing until, after 2, and then very limited. And I was kind of strict until I was also driving myself a little batty because she needed some distraction while I was trying to work. So just learning how to pivot and do what's best for you. Sometimes that goes against the grain of what all these parenting books will tell you.
I love that. So listening to yourself instead of what the quote experts are saying.
Yeah, because you're the expert of your own household.
Oh, wow. I can relate to that so much. When my middle son was a baby, I was determined to make him a better sleeper. His brother had not slept through the night until he was like 2.5 years old. And I read so many books about infant sleep and optimizing and nap schedules and timing and setting and all of the things. And I ended up really making myself a bit of a mess. And I literally had to get rid of all of the books and just take what I could from them and realize that all I could do was provide optimal environment for him to sleep, and I couldn't make him sleep. So I really love what Yolanda had to say about, not always listening to the experts and just doing what's right for you and your family. Our next piece of wisdom comes from Dayna Abraham. Dayna is wonderful. She's the person who I first learned about sensory processing disorder from. She has a really great book called Sensory Processing 101. If you have a child with sensory issues, or you think you might, our podcast episode together and her book is a really, really great place to start. Dayna's work is all about helping people with what she calls out-of-the-box kiddos, so kids that are more challenging than the average child. We do that a lot in our work too with peaceful parenting, but that's really her singular focus. Her signature program is called Calm the Chaos, and I think she does a really great job of helping parents do that. So let's hear what Dayna has for us.
Some days it's going to feel like an absolute poop show, and it's going to feel like you don't know what you're doing, you're messing everything up, and you're ruining your kids. And I want you to know that you're not, that none of us get it perfect. And that as long as you continue to love your kids as much as you do right now, as long as you continue to understand them and see them for who they are and help them make sense of this world, then they're going to be okay, and so are you.
Wow, that is just such great, amazing advice and wisdom. And I tell that to parents all the time. You've probably heard me say that on this podcast. Sometimes, no matter what you do, things are going to be hard, and it's okay. You really don't have to be perfect. Okay, next up, we have Leslie Priscilla. Leslie is a conscious parenting coach, and she's the founder of Latinx Parenting. She's a mom of 3, and her goal is to end chancla culture.
I think I would tell her not to take herself so seriously. I think that there's a lot of pressure that we put on ourselves to get things right. And what I have found in this, these 10 years of being a mother, it's not a long time, right? It's not a very long time, but I would want her to know that it's okay to not know everything.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's okay to not feel like you have to have things figured out, and to not operate from a place of fear, and try as best, as we can, as she could, to move into a place of operating from love, right? Because a lot of times we are scared of raising our children the ways that we were raised, or there's a lot of fear around doing things wrong in whatever way. And so I would feel like that would be something that she would, benefit from hearing, that she doesn't necessarily have to operate from that place.
I love that so much. We don't have to be perfect. That's such graceful and compassionate words from Leslie. So, so wonderful. And it's so wonderful to be reminded that it's okay that we don't know everything. We don't have to be in that fear place. In fact, if we're not in fear, then we can actually be better parents if we're not afraid that we're going to mess up. So I just love that. Thank you, Leslie. Let's hear now from Dr. Sharon Saline. And I especially loved talking to her on my podcast because my daughter has ADHD, so it was really helpful. And by the way, you've probably heard me say she's fine with me sharing that about her. I would never disclose anything that she wasn't okay with me disclosing. But I have found Dr. Sharon Saline's resources to be so wonderful. And her book, What Your ADHD Child Wishes You Knew, is just such a great resource for any of you who have children with ADHD. Along with being the author of that wonderful book I just mentioned, Dr. Sharon Saline is a psychologist, and she's often found contributing to Attitude magazine. If you have a child with ADHD, you should definitely look her up. So let's hear what she has to say for us.
I would say what I say to a lot of parents who are raising kids with ADHD and those who aren't: zoom out. Take a wider perspective, a longer perspective. Your child will be okay. They need to go through certain things, and obviously we don't necessarily want them scraping their knees every day, both metaphorically and physically. But zoom out and really think about what's most important, and that's the relationship that your child has with you and other people.
Oh, I just love that. It's so hard sometimes to get out of the moment, the difficult moment that we're in. But if we can zoom out and see a bigger perspective, life just feels a little bit easier. Our next piece of wisdom is from Mr. Chazz. You may know Mr. Chazz from his Instagram and TikTok fame. He's absolutely blown up on social media in the past little while. He has like 1 trillion followers. And that's because he's so good at communicating the peaceful parenting message in really creative ways that really resonate with people. I just love watching his videos, and I think he's been doing a great job of moving the needle for parents who think that peaceful parenting isn't for them. He's just so good at putting this approach into very concrete and understandable terms. So let's have a listen to Mr. Chazz.
That it is a journey, that it's not about being perfect, and it's not about the one mistake you made when they were 7 months old or 7 years old. It is about the aggregate of things that you're doing. It is about It's about learning and improving. It's about having that improvementist mindset. The goal isn't to be perfect every day. The goal is to improve a little every day. Avoid being a perfectionist, be an improvementist. And even just by that is a huge example you're doing just with that mentality of allowing mistakes and learning and growing and being open and vulnerable. You're giving your children such an amazing gift outside of the things that you're learning to do. Just that process that you're going through of that journey is already an amazing gift in itself. And I'm not one to, I don't think we should even say like good parents or bad parents, but if I were to make a judgment of what makes a good parent, it is that wanting that improvement. And so that's what I would say.
So great. We all need reminders not to be hard on ourselves and not to be perfectionists. That's such an important part of this work. Our next nugget of wisdom is from Kristy Forbes. Kristy is another one of my favorite people that I wish that we could be friends in real life. I just love her energy so much, and I have learned so much about autism from Kristy. I've taken 2 of her courses just to help me professionally so that I can support the neurodivergent families in my practice better. And if you have anyone in your family who's neurodivergent, I 100% recommend all of her work. So let's just give a listen to Kristy. She's an autism support specialist. She's autistic herself. If you haven't caught the episode with her yet, I mean, of course, I want you to go back and listen to all of the ones that you've missed if somebody piques your interest here. But if you haven't caught this one with Kristy, it's just it's such a wonderful episode, and I loved her story so much. I got goosebumps while she was telling it. So let's just have a listen to what Kristy has to share with us.
Just be so kind to yourself. You are carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders, and it's not yours to carry. You are not responsible for others. It's great to be a carer by nature, but boundaries are important. You are doing a wonderful job. I guess extending to myself that same compassion and forgiveness and unconditional love that we extend to our children. Yeah, which is something I have to remind myself of a lot.
Oh my gosh, it's so powerful to hear all of these together, and just Kristy's message of being kind to ourselves. Oh, I know I say that to all of you all of the time, and please just soak it in and really try. The self-compassion piece is so important. Our next piece of wisdom is from Eve Rodsky, who wrote Finding Your Unicorn Space. And before that, she wrote Fair Play, which the first book that she wrote was about sharing the domestic load and your household. And her second book, Unicorn Space, which is what we discussed on the podcast, is about being interested in yourself. And that also was a great episode. I know I say that about all of them, but you know what? Because I get to choose the people who come in the podcast, I always choose people that I find really interesting and that talk about interesting things. So I guess it makes sense that I find them all so interesting. What I love about Eve is that she's really standing up for us. She's standing up for us parents, and especially for us women, to be more than just a mom or a partner. And I just love that. So let's just have a listen to what Eve has to say. If you could go back to new Mother Eve, what advice would you give your younger mother self?
What I would say to my younger self is, first of all, I'd give a lot of compassion for her because she didn't have, like I said, a Sarah or a community to unpack any of these messages. But what I would say is that you don't need to burn it all down to build yourself back up. You know, you have an ability to stay powerful, to stay who you are. And I would also tell her, get that stupid mom necklace off your neck and put your own initial on as a reminder. So I would make her take off the mom necklace that I got as a present right when Zach was born, and I would put on my own initial.
Okay, did you hear that, parents? You don't need to burn it down. You can still be the person that you were before you had kids. Of course, we're going to change and grow, but we don't need to just lose ourselves in the identity as parents, and we can still find things and do things that make us interested in our own lives. I love that. The next person we're going to hear from is Teacher Tom. What I really love about Teacher Tom is that he celebrates play, and he's like the champion of play for children. And we so need to hear that today. I hear so many parents who are worried about their kids' academic performance and he's in kindergarten and he doesn't know how to read yet, etc. And I just want to say, let them play. Play is the work of childhood, and it is how children learn and is how they work things out. And it's so wonderful to have a champion like Teacher Tom, who's just that champion for childhood and for play. Let's hear what he has to say.
I think I would tell myself to relax, that children raise themselves way more than we think they do. The world raises them more than we think they do. And I think that would, and to just take joy in each moment, because, I mean, having an adult child, it feels like she was 2 years old yesterday.
I hear you, with you on that.
And that's the piece, and I think this all the time, the older I've gotten, because when I first started teaching, my child was the same age as the kids I was teaching, so I had this, all the parents were kind of like my peers. But the older I've gotten, the younger the parents have gotten, and, or so it seems. And what I find myself, they'll be, stressing out about, I don't know, all the usual things, potty learning and not eating healthy or not sleeping enough and all the usual things. And I get it, they're traumatic and they're difficult as a parent. But I just, what I want to say to them is, you need to enjoy even this, because all too soon it'll be gone and you'll look back and say, wow, I know it's hard to believe when you're in the middle of it, but you would give anything to have one more day of potty learning.
Wow, that was so poignant for me. I didn't know I was going to cry. My middle son, as I'm taping this, just turned 18 yesterday, and Teacher Tom is right. Sometimes I think if I could just go back and have one day with them as babies again, it would just be wonderful to be able to go back to some of those times. And you know what? That's not to say that I'm romanticizing all of you, who are struggling with little kids, because it's not easy. But from where I stand now, it would be nice to go back to some of those days and just hold those little pudgy hands again and feel those like squishy little bodies and hear those little voices. So try and soak up what you can now. And thank you, Teacher Tom, for making me cry on my podcast. Okay, so the next person will be Iris Chen. Iris, it was so great having her on the podcast as well. She made me think so much, and her book was really, really great. If anyone has not read it yet, it's called Untigering, and she looked at how she was raised and as she tried to raise her own children the same way from a very traditional Chinese American perspective with an authoritarian style, authoritarian bent, and it just did not work for her children. And she had to find a new way, and the new way that she found was conscious parenting, peaceful parenting, whatever you want to call it. And I love what she has to say. So let's just give a listen and hear what she would go back and tell her younger parent self.
I think it would be it sort of goes back to what we were talking about before. It would be an invitation to myself to remember what it was like to be a child, to remember little Iris and my inner child, so that I could just begin offering her empathy, offering her understanding and acceptance and all those things that I wanted to offer my own children, but was struggling to do, and to begin the healing process there with my inner child.
Yes, may we all offer ourselves that empathy and give our inner child that empathy, and remember that we can now meet our own needs that were not met as children. We're going to shift gears a little bit to one of my favorite funny people, Lynn Lyons. I just love her. I know I keep saying that, but I'm just, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful to have had all of these wonderful guests on my podcast. And you know what? We have more coming up as we get into our second year. We have an equally amazing lineup of people. But Lynn Lyons, she is my mentor in all things anxiety. She's been on the podcast twice also. And she's just hilarious. If you don't know her podcast, you should check out Flusterclux, which is a really, really wonderful podcast about anxiety and helping kids with anxiety or families with anxiety. Oh, and also I should say, Lynn is also the author of my go-to resource for anxiety, which is the book Anxious Kids, Anxious Parents. And as I mentioned before, we're going to put everybody's books in the show notes and all of their contact information. If you want to learn more about them, we're also in the show notes. We'll also put all of the episodes that these folks were in, so you've got them all in one place if you missed any and you want to go back and hear the rest of what they had to say. So let's hear what Lynn has to share with us about what she would tell her younger parent self.
I would tell myself that it's a long haul and that the most important thing that you can model for your kids is joy. And make sure that you are having moments, not all the time, because it's not possible, but make sure that you are having moments of fun and moments of silliness and moments of just laughing so hard that you can't breathe. Parenting is about joy. And that's what we want to make sure that we're giving. That's what I would have told myself. I think we did a pretty good job about that, but it would have been nice if, every once in a while somebody would have knocked on the door and I would have answered it and they would say, "Hi, just a little reminder, have moments of joy." And I would have been, I probably at that moment would have said like, "Fine," and slammed the door in their face. But parenting is about moments of joy.
Yeah.
Modeling that and creating that.
Okay, I told you she was funny. Thank you, Lynn. I can always count on you to make me laugh and bring joy with your teaching. So you are actually modeling what you've told us that we should be remembering, which is to find those moments of joy. And you do that all the time in your work with your humor. And I really appreciate that about you. Our next nugget of wisdom comes from Julie Lythcott-Haims. And Julie Lythcott-Haims is the author of 3 wonderful books. Her first book came directly out of her experience as a freshman dean at Stanford, where she saw how woefully unprepared for life a lot of the first-year university students were who were coming in. So she wrote a parenting book, even though that wasn't the field that she was in. She wrote a parenting book called How to Raise an Adult, which is a wonderful book. Her second book is a memoir about growing up biracial in the U.S. I haven't read that yet, and I really want to. It's called Real American. And then her third book is what we talked about on the podcast, among a whole bunch of other things. We talked about her third book, which is How to Be an Adult. It's called Your Turn, How to Be an Adult. Let's hear what Julie would have shared with her younger parent self if she could have.
I'm going to answer that, but now I'm stalling for time. I'm not really stalling for time. I'm joking. I just want to say, because I know we're wrapping up, I want to say to all the listeners, thanks for being here. You've stuck through a conversation that has had a lot of emotion in it, been some storytelling. If anything came up for you, I hope you'll take note of what it was, because that's a little clue from yourself that maybe something you heard is important to you. To answer your question, I would say own my authority as a parent. I was the indulgent permissive type, which is the just wants to make everything easy and fun and everything is good, didn't have a lot of expectations, didn't have a lot of rules. I was never going to be the authoritarian, but that is the opposite of what I'm describing. All the rules and none of the feelings. I was all of the feelings and none of the rules. My kids were well behaved. They didn't need a lot of rules, but we were always trying to say yes. And it meant that our kids never had to deal with the no's. And I think I was afraid to claim my authority. I think I was afraid that they wouldn't listen to me, which is ridiculous. I realized in hindsight, in therapy, we've learned, when the therapist's like, what would happen if you told Sawyer that, this is an expectation? My husband and I was like, well, what if he doesn't follow it? And the therapist like, you think Sawyer's not going to listen to you? Whew. So I was afraid to stand in my spot, as my friend Ole Jorgensen and Sherry Glukoft-Wong put it in their forthcoming book, Claim Your Spot. There are issues we would never compromise on, like you got to wear a seatbelt. Well, it turns out there are more things like that in family life, in the upbringing of children, where we have to be that clear. We wouldn't say, oh, it's fine. You don't have to wear your seatbelt. There's just one time. No. So we've got to hold some boundaries around things like bedtimes and around things like food and things like what gets done when and so on. I would have stood in my spot and taken a deep breath and felt I have the right and responsibility as their parent to set some parameters around all of this, boundaries, rules, that makes children feel safe. Mm-hmm. And they know what's up. They know what's going on.
Yeah.
They know what crosses the line and what doesn't.
We talk about that in Peaceful Parenting, the importance of kind, firm limits. Can I just ask you a follow-up about that? You said that you thought it was because you were afraid they would not follow it.
Yeah.
Although I wonder, because this is what I see with a lot of my clients, especially clients who work a lot, they have such limited time with their kids that they don't want to make them unhappy in the time that they have together. Do you think that was at all part of?
I think it was both. I definitely did not want to make them unhappy. Life is easier when our children are happy, right? Family life is easier when our children are happy. This is frankly the equivalent of cutting their food too long. I'll just cut their food because it's quicker if I do it, right? We have limited time. Let me just take care of this. I'll just carry you across the street because we're in a hurry, right? Limited time means we often take these shortcuts and miss teaching the skill or letting the lesson stand or whatever it is because we're in too much of a rush, or we just want everything to be easy and calm and kind in these precious moments we have. That is a very short-term way of parenting. It overlooks the long-term impact of those short-term, easier moments.
That was a cool 2-for-1 piece of wisdom there. We had the sort of step up and be a strong leader, as she said, claim your authority. And then we also had don't take shortcuts. Just be there for thinking long term. So I thought that was really cool. It is sort of an example too of what an interesting conversation Julie and I had. She was really fun to talk to. Our next person that we're going to hear from, this is our second to last person, and then you'll hear from me. Our next guest expert is Janine Halloran, and she is a licensed mental health counselor, and she's been working with children and teens and their families for 20 years. Her books are the best-selling Coping Skills for Kids workbook and Coping Skills for Teens workbook. And you know what? Ever since I talked with her on the podcast, I have been recommending her Coping Skills checklist, which you can get for free. It's a free download on her website. And I've been recommending this like crazy to clients. It's such a wonderful resource for helping kids figure out what helps them to regulate. And that's really what she means by coping skills, is regulation skills. So definitely check that out. We'll put that in the show notes. So let's hear from Janine.
It's okay to make a plan, and it's okay if the plan does not go as expected.
I love that.
Because, as my birth with my first child was not easy or what I had planned, and what I anticipated life being as a mom for the first couple of months was not the way that I anticipated it, but it was still amazing and life-changing and glorious. And same with my second child, who was a completely different creature. It's so funny. They came out in two different ways, but it's okay that it didn't go as you expected, and just go with it. And it'll be okay. It's all right if it doesn't go to plan.
I love that. My husband gets annoyed with me because I always like to make plans like, okay, when are we going to go do this thing? And he's like, why do we have to plan everything? I'm like, you don't understand. I'm fine with changing the plan. Like, it's not that we have to make the plan and stick to it. I just like to have a plan, and then we can change it if we need to change it. But I hate having no plan at all.
Yep. I'm the same way. I like to plan too, but sometimes I can get a little rigid, and I'm like, but that was my plan.
Yeah.
So it's nice to know, just be flexible about it. You can change the plan. Changes are okay.
Be flexible. That's something that we talk about a lot, isn't it, in peaceful parenting? Being flexible ourselves with limits, and also helping our kids understand about being flexible. That's where so much emotional dysregulation comes from, when it's hard to be flexible. Okay, on to our final guest expert for this mashup episode. We have Dr. Mona Delahooke. And again, I'm saying this over and over again, a wonderful conversation. Her books are such fantastic resources for us as parents, and they really look at the nervous system and parenting. And this is something that I've been studying. I've been doing some training in polyvagal theory, which is understanding the nervous system and our nervous system reaction and the different states that we find ourselves in with our nervous system. Dr. Mona does such a wonderful job of making that accessible for parents in her 2 books. One of them is called Beyond Behaviors. That was actually written more for clinicians and educators, I believe, but I found it really helpful. And I know we read that for book club in my membership, in my Peaceful Parenting membership, and my members found it really helpful too as parents. Then she did go on and she's written a second book, which is specifically about parenting and the nervous system, written especially for parents, called Brain Body Parenting. So I highly recommend you check that out. Really, really great book, and helping us understand what happens when our kids' nervous systems get activated and or hijacked, and how that affects their behavior and also what we can do to help them when they do get hijacked. Let's hear what Dr. Mona would tell her younger parent self if she could go back in time.
The main piece of advice I'd be whispering in my ear is be gentle on yourself. Be gentle on yourself. This isn't about you. This is about your child. Oh, I wish I had that little angel. I'm sure my children wish I did too, but it's never too late to repair relationships, and there's always hope. So,
what a lovely message of hope to end on. Well, not quite end on, because you are going to hear what I would tell my younger parent self if I could go back in time to almost 22 years ago when I first became a mother. I had to think about this a lot because, I agree, of course, wholeheartedly with everything that everyone said. And there were so many wonderful things, but I really wanted to think about, what about me specifically with my life and my kids? And it's two things, but they're related. So one of the things that I would tell myself if I could go back is to slow down and be more mindful of the everyday moments and just really appreciating the little things and the little moments that when we talk in peaceful parenting about delighting in our children. And I think I did that, but I think that I spent a lot of time thinking about, when the next milestone is achieved, or when they're all sleeping through the night, or when they're in school. And I was really almost future focused. I wasn't living in the present moment as much as I would have liked to. And maybe if I'd found meditation earlier, like Ned. But I think that if I could go back, I would try and stay more present and mindful and not be future oriented to when things would be easier. And you may have heard me talk about this before, but I realized partway through their childhood that this is it. And I actually have a good friend who had a t-shirt made for me when I realized this. And I realized this is it. This is the moment. Any day could be the last day. I know that sounds dark, but this is it. There's no, waiting for things to get better or easier or be different or, have more money or more time or whatever it is. But this is it. This is the moment that we're living in. So being more mindful and slowing down and trying to be more in the present is what I would tell myself, because as you heard me when I almost started to bawl my eyes out, it goes by really fast. It really truly does. My youngest is about to turn 15, and in a few years I won't have kids at home anymore, which is just utterly appalling to me. I'll try not to cry again, but you'll remember I said two things, and I think in order to have achieved the first, I would need one more thing to tell myself, which is to ask for help. Don't try to think that I can do everything myself, because, when I said I would look forward to when things were easier or when we had more money or when I had more time, it was because I had a lot on my plate and I didn't ask for help. I thought I could do everything myself, and I wasn't good about telling my husband that I needed more support from him, and I know he would have given it to me, but I don't know, I thought I was Superwoman. And, admittedly, I still struggle with that a little bit. It looks a little different now that my kids aren't young. But I would really just tell myself, you don't have to do everything yourself. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to say no. And it's okay to admit that you can't do everything. So that's my 2 cents, what I would go back and tell myself almost 22 years ago. Slow down and recognize that this is it, and try and be more in the moment and ask for help so that you can do that. Because when you're, pushing yourself so hard, you can't be in the moment. I hope this was meaningful for you. It certainly was meaningful for me to revisit all of these beautiful thoughts and beautiful guests that we've had over the past year. As I mentioned, we'll have a nice collection in the show notes of our guests' books and where you can find out more about them and where you can listen to the episode if you haven't heard it yet. And also, I just wanted to remind you that if you want a printable download or just a download to keep it, keep a reference for yourself, we have put together a beautiful sheet that has sort of a little summary of everyone's advice to our younger parent selves that maybe you can take advantage of now if you're somewhere earlier in this journey of parenthood. And I also just want to give a shout out to one of the people in my Facebook group who suggested this idea a few months ago. She commented that she was enjoying the guest experts' advice so much, and she wondered if we could put together a resource that had them all in one place. And I thought, wow, that would be a great thing to do for our 1-year anniversary episode. So here you are. And if you would like to download the resource that I just mentioned to you, it will be in the show notes, a link to get it. That sort of cheat sheet of a summary of all of the beautiful pieces of wisdom that we have been given and listened to today. You can just go to sarah.rosensweet.com/guest expert advice. So if you want to download this summary of all of the wonderful things you've heard of today, go to sarah.rosensweet.com/guest expert advice, and you can get it for free there. I will see you next time on the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. I hope you found this conversation insightful and exactly what you needed in this moment. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Remember that I'm rooting for you. I see you out there showing up for your kids and doing the best you can. Sending hugs over the airwaves today. Hang in there. You've got this.